What words or phrases would you use to describe him? Powerful? Thunderous. Scary. Omnipotent. The still voice. Nice. This side of church is awfully quiet. Sorry? Creator. Excellent. Our words are all very tame. What about when you think of things like Noah's Ark or those big cataclysmic moments? Untamed. Nice. Judge. Yeah. Vengeance. Yeah. Oh, we've got so many different pictures of God, but we're going to come back to that in a bit. But today we're going to dart round a bit in Jacob's life. So over the past few weeks, we've been looking and we've seen just how broken and dysfunctional Jacob and his family were. But we've also talked about how God uses and chooses broken people like Jacob and calls them to something better and something more positive. But today we're going to look at two amazing moments when Jacob met God face to face. When we met him last week, he was fleeing from Laban. Laban had chased him down, caught up with him, shouted at him. Marcus shouted at me, which was terrifying. But finally, they came to a place of forgiveness and peace and parted ways. But today we're going to jump in the time machine and we're going to go back before that encounter. So the point we're going to is just after Jacob has stolen the blessing from Esau. And now he's running away from Esau and he's going to meet Laban for the first time. And I need to ask for forgiveness this morning because for a Bible nerd like me, there is so much in these passages. I'm not going to be able to cover all of it, but a few things that have really caught my eyes, which I'm going to pick up on. So Jacob is fleeing. So meanwhile, Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. And he reached a certain place where he decided to camp because the sun had gone down. Jacob's on the run from his brother, and he's reached a certain place, or in Hebrew, pagar makom. The Hebrew verb pagar kind of indicates this is a random place. He's just stumbled across it, sun's going down, time to have a sleep. But the word makom is more interesting because it has the definite article attached. It's not just a place, it is the place. So for Jacob, this is a random place to stop for a nap, but it is exactly the place that God wanted him to be. So he's going to sleep, and he's taken one of the stones of the place, and he put it under his head and lay down in that place. Sounds comfortable? Stone as a pillow. Now, the eagle-eyed among you will notice I have chosen a different translation for this verse. This is NRSV, and usually I use the NET translation. And I'm not just being annoying, but just let me have another little moment of geekery here. This one isn't so important, but it does kind of lay the foundation stone, pun intended, for the next point. Thank you. I'm here all morning. But words and language really fascinate me. I'm not a linguist. I can't read Hebrew to save myself. So I use some pretty phenomenal resources I've got available to me, which help me out and they make me look a bit cleverer than I really am. But typically when I'm studying scripture, I will use at least 3 different translations. And I look, read them, see what the differences are, see what's leaping out, what's catching my eye. My go-tos at the moment in the Old Testament are the NET, the New English Translation, the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version, which is the one that we use here in church, and Robert Alter's translation, which is a massive 3-volume tome. But humour me as we look at these 3 different translations. So the NRSV, he put it under his head. He put the stone under his head. Robert Alter's translation has, and put it at his head, while the NET has, he placed it near his head. And you know what? All 3 are technically correct. but it just doesn't make much sense for him to have put the stone under his head. It's far more likely it would have been near his head as a form of defense or protection. And this little phrase to describe where the stone is, it comes out a few times in the Old Testament. Most notably in 1 Samuel, where it's describing the location of Saul's spear. It's near his head, it's not under his head, because that would just be dangerous. But for me, more amusingly, it's also used to describe the location of the cake that's baking at the head, not under the head, of Elijah in 1 Kings. Anyway, thanks for humouring me. Going to keep going. So he's asleep with his stone under or near his head, wherever it is. Not that important. But he dreamed that there was a ladder set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending it and descending it, and the Lord stood beside him. And I've chosen NRSV again here because I think it captures it better. I'm not going to dwell on the word translated as ladder, and there's all sorts of potential symbolism with that. It could have been a ladder or a ramp or stairs or anything that you can go up and down. It's not that important. But the important thing is the location of God. And this is where different translations can really make a bit of a mess of things. Many translations put God at the top of the ladder. And technically this could be correct, but for me, theologically, it makes no sense. The phrase alaf can be, which is at the top of or near, can be translated as near or next to, like the NRSV does. And there's quite a few other translations which do. And in a moment, we'll hear Jacob's famous line, "Surely the Lord was in this place, and I did not know it." It's not surely God was above this place, it's surely God is in this place. And this might seem like a minor detail, but it really isn't. Beside him makes it really clear that God is near and with Jacob. It's not some aloof God we're talking about. And just like God descended the ladder to be present on earth with Jacob, our brother Jesus came to walk on the same dusty soil as us. Now, given what we know about Jacob and what he's done to his brother and his father, you wouldn't be surprised with God being right next to Jacob and just giving him an almighty tongue lashing. And that would kind of fit in with our preconceptions of God. But instead, God speaks to Jacob, and he offers nothing but love, grace, and promises. God says to Jacob, "I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham and the God of your father Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the ground you are lying on. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west, east, north, and south. And so all the families of the earth may receive blessings through you and through your descendants. I am with you. I will protect you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Did you catch just how many times God says "I" in that passage? I am the Lord. I will give you. I am with you. I will protect you. I will not leave you. I promised. So despite how big a ratbag Jacob's been, God offers him nothing but good. Jacob doesn't get what we think he might deserve, but instead he receives what the Lord gives, and that is grace. And that doesn't quite line up with some of those words we were thinking about God earlier. This is a God of grace, not a God of vengeance and wrath. Jacob wakes up and then he thinks that famous thought, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not realize it." Yet this is Jacob. He's still not entirely convinced that God really is God. Because after he sets a stone up as a kind of sacred pillar and pours oil on it, he makes a vow. "If God is with me and protects me on this journey I'm taking, and gives me food to eat and clothing to wear, and I return safely to my father's home, then the Lord will become my God. He's seen God face to face in a dream. He's had promises and grace from God, but he's still not convinced. He's still trying to make a bargain with God. You do this for me, God, and I'll believe in you. If we're honest, I think most of us have probably said something similar in our own lives. Anyway, we're going to scooch forward in time quite a bit. It's probably at least 20 years, and Jacob is now leaving Laban. They've made peace, and now he's heading off to meet up with his brother Esau. And the story we're about to hear is, I think, one of the weirdest encounters in the Bible. I think it's probably only matched by Balaam and his talking donkey in terms of weirdness. But that's another story which I'd love to get into at some stage, just because it's so fun. But Jacob has reached the river Jabbok, and he sent his wives, his servants, and his children across the river. And he's come back, and he's now by himself. And he's about to have another nighttime encounter with God. So Jacob was left alone. Then a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not defeat Jacob, he struck the socket of his hip. So the socket of Jacob's hip was dislocated while he was wrestling with him. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." "I will not let you go," Jacob replied, "unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" He answered, "Jacob." "No longer will your name be Jacob," the man told him, "but Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." "Why do you ask my name?" the man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, explaining, "Certainly I have seen God face to face and have survived." That word avak, or wrestle, this is the only time it appears in the Old Testament. And Jewish scholars have had an absolute field day trying to unpack this. There's just some really bonkers explanations. Some interpreters say this is a demon or a devil or a dark spirit who's wrestling with Jacob in the night. Some people say it is either Esau or Esau's spirit wrestling with him. And some even dare to say, actually, this was God. But for me, this is where I'm so grateful that we have Jesus, because it helps us understand this on a new level. But we'll come back to that in a bit. In Jacob's last encounter with God, Jacob was asleep and he was dreaming. But there's no mention of Jacob being asleep here, so we can't blame this on Jacob having had too much cheese and a really bonkers dream. This is Jacob's lived waking experience. And the character that Jacob wrestles with is first of all called a man. And Jacob doesn't realize at first who this is. But I think the penny does drop, because after wrestling all night and having his hip dislocated and continuing to wrestle with him, Jacob asks the man to bless him. And this man changes his name. God is the blesser and the name changer. And God gives Jacob this new name, Israel. And again, scholars have had an absolute field day over this name, Israel. But the simplest answer is that the name means God fights or God wrestles, or there's a few different ways. But this name will replace the name Jacob. And it's both a promise and a call for faith. And in essence, the Lord is saying that Jacob would have victory and receive the promises that God had promised him, because God would fight for him. Now, this is all kind of weird and amazing in equal measure, but the thing that really blows me away is the fact that God didn't win. Jacob was injured, but he still won. If this was a game of top trumps, I think God would definitely be the winner. Now, I've got no doubt that God could have won that fight if he wanted to. But I do believe that God chose to throw the fight, that God deliberately did not win. As Chad Bird says, being found in human form, he humbled himself by refusing to win the fight. God is here in human form. And here we have a foreshadowing of the crucifixion. In Philippians, we read, Jesus, who though he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking on the form of a slave, by looking like other men and by sharing in human nature. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. God, who was defeated by Jacob, would be defeated by humans and nailed to the cross. God knew even then what needed to happen. In Acts we read, God knew what would happen, and his pre-arranged plan was carried out when Jesus was betrayed. The cross was the destination all along. Jacob won the fight, but the next day he was left limping. And I wonder if he ever actually fully healed from that encounter, or if that limp served as a daily reminder to him of that encounter. I'm going to close by quoting Chad Bird again. Anyone who tells you that becoming a disciple of Jesus will make your life easier is a false teacher, a charlatan, or quite simply a madman. When Christ calls a man or woman to follow him, you can be sure he is calling them into an uncomfortable life, or to something even better. We will limp day by day with the secret joy of the divinely scarred. The life of discipleship is not about us getting stronger. Rather, it's about us becoming increasingly aware of our weakness and the Lord's strength. And so I pray that you will metaphorically, hopefully, walk with a limp. Never forget your encounters with God. And never be foolish enough to think that you can go it alone, that you can live on your strength alone. May we be limping disciples. Amen.